Hey there, I'm Mark Drager, and the conversation that follows is a raw behind-the-scenes talk with Bud Morse, the president and owner of Canada's Best Store Fixtures. In this talk, Bud reveals his industry insider tactics, stories, and the lessons learned from the top retail game-changer projects he's been a part of over the last 20 years. Projects like how shoppers turned the beauty industry upside down when they launched the beauty counter, why Canadian Tire changed its floor plans and approach over the years, and how they helped Tim Hortons go digital across 2,000 stores in only 10 months. All of that and a whole lot more.
Surely over the course of the last 15 or 20 years, there's got to be something that sticks out in your mind, not as the most important, not as the most challenging, not as the biggest, not as the hardest, but just when you think back, you're like, you know what, this was a pretty cool thing we did. I was thinking it'd be great. We're just going to record and talk. Just hit me with some things and ponder and we'll go wherever we go. But for you, what are some things that stick out in your memory where you're like, that was some pretty cool shit we did?
Yeah. It's funny, I was thinking about it last night. That's a really good question. The things that stick out for me are the game changer events. So like the first Shoppers Drug Mart beauty boutique that we did ever. And that sort of changed, and that like just because of the impact it had on retail at large. So the first Shoppers Drug Mart beauty boutique was in Brampton at Queen and whatever. Anyways.
And what year would this have been?
Probably 2002, 2001, 2002, somewhere around there.
But this is before CBSF then?
Yeah. I was at Excel Store Fixtures.
Okay.
At Excel Store Fixtures.
And what were you doing at the time? You were more focused on sales or business development?
More sales business. But otherwise, my title was Vice President of Contract Management, which really, if you looked at the job description, it covered everything. So I was responsible for sales and business development, but I was also responsible for engineering and estimating. The only thing that wasn't my responsibility was manufacturing, but everything
and installation.
Everything up until the point of manufacturing and after manufacturing was my responsibility.
How did that come across your desk? Or how did the opportunity?
So we were already providing, shelving, that sort of stuff, odds and ends for shoppers. We were their biggest vendor. But this was like for them it was major. Like it was such a cast off from where they were that honestly when we built the first store, I said can you guys afford to build lots of these? Like, you go from linoleum floors and painted walls that were, all white to tile floors was one step up, but then, going to a really high quality tile floor and maybe we put some tile on the wall and, start to introduce some curves in your fixtures versus straight lines. Like it was all like the initial stores we did were just like, and the guy that was leading it at that time he was a really cool dude. He was a CEO. And he went on to great success after Shoppers. He was just like, his thinking was way out from where the organization had been. And he had a lot of people questioning him whether he was actually sane, but he took us under his wing and we helped, tremendously. We made so many design and engineering introductions, testing new materials. We used so much glass and light and different kinds of light. It was the early days of LEDs where you couldn't control the temperature and the color of the lighting. They were all over the place. And I remember meeting with a big manufacturer of LED lights, and they would say, this was sort of the ongoing joke, was that they would say, okay, the light's guaranteed to last 10 years. And so you just started producing them 2 years ago. How do you know it's going to last 10 years? We spent a hell of a lot of time with them, color gels, and it was really cool. And to the point where it started to multiply and was so successful that it was the first time on a grand scale that U.S. retailers were coming to Canada to see what was going on.
Right.
Whereas,
so how did they sell?
All of our customers would go to the U.S. to see what they were doing.
Right.
And come back with all these ideas and let's try this and let's try that. Where this was the first time that U.S. retailers were coming here and go, ooh. And then the entire concept got copied literally verbatim by Dwayne Reed out of New York. And then Oddly enough, Walgreens bought Duane Reade shortly thereafter, specifically because their cosmetics program was so successful.
Right.
Like this sort of trickle down is fascinating.
So hold on, can I ask? So I know prior to this, the main cosmetic approach was you go to Bay, you go to, I guess, Simpsons, you go to a thing. Yeah. There's a beauty counter. They have rented the space. They have the reps sitting there, because I used to work at a hotel where we trained all of those reps all the time. But was it that Shoppers just wasn't in beauty, or was it that it used to just be a gondola for beauty?
That's exactly right. They were in beauty, but in a very small way. Like, it was department stores that owned cosmetics.
Yes.
And so Shoppers comes in and starts to disrupt that market. And, there were a lot of unhappy people about that, because that was not their space. They should not be in that space. And they not only went into that space, they took over that space, and they revolutionized the space. So it was really, I think that kind of stuff is, it was great to be at the outset of it.
Of an industry change. Now, can I ask you, so looking back, this was a Shoppers-driven initiative, strategy was put together. Was Shoppers driving this to the point where any vendor could have made it happen, or were you guys like really instrumental to making this happen?
Yeah, so I remember this very, very, very vividly as well. And so it was Shoppers' initiative, obviously. I mean, they want to get into the cosmetics. Yeah,
it was a business strategy that led there, of course.
Right. And they had hired a designer out of France. So he was coming up to these meetings and talking about design and design intents, and usually happens. I'm the sort of the voice of reason, the practical guy in the room. So you sort of let the designer run for a while, and they go, okay, well, that really can't be built like that. Actually, that project was where we coined the phrase floating shelves. Because designers used to do this all the time, and they would just put shelves sort of in midair, but practically when you're talking about manufacturers, okay, so that shelf has to actually be supported on something.
Right,
there has to
supported, counterbalanced, it has to hold weight.
Or something's got to be something around it. It doesn't just float there in midair.
Yeah.
And then eventually what happened, they only let him go so far, and I guess, recognized our strengths in the arena, and then just sort of we took over the design and engineering and everything, and I fired him and sent him on his way, and then we just we ran with it from there.
Yeah. So he's like an architect, and then you're the general contractor who has to actually go like, hey, there's 4 inches between these things. We actually have to make this make sense now.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that guy, never saw anything around there again, and we sort of took over the project and became subject matter experts from then on, and ran with it. Built, I don't know how many we built.
That's a pretty cool story. And then, you helped them get into beauty. You set a new standard for what's possible within pharma or pharmacy, and then it's been adopted, worldwide. That's pretty cool, man.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had so many people come to us because we were the people that were building the Shoppers Beauty Boutique, that would come to us and want to pick up brains and talk about, design things, and can you build this for me? And we've had so much come out of it. It was great. Probably my most memorable project.
Yeah.
Per se. Yeah.
That's very
cool.
But
there's been a few like that. Like, when I think back, Canadian Tire as well. Canadian Tire, I go back to the class of strategy, which was back when a guy named Steve Bichon was running Canadian Tire. And it was just the idea of making the stores uniform, and that if you walked into a store in Woodbridge or in North Bay, that
to turn right to automotive, to turn. You don't know how crazy that drives me, man, because the one near my office, right? So it's 404 and whatever it is, Major Mac. You walk in and automotive's on the left, and it's just so bizarre.
Yeah, just that thought of that uniformity across the chain was a very different thought.
But why? It seems so natural. Like grocery.
It does now.
Grocery knows how to cycle. Like, you go in, you you go counterclockwise, you have produce, and then you have, like, it's been established.
Yeah.
But why in hardware is it suddenly, because Home Depot is the same, right? Home Depot, it's like all the buildings are different. It's kind of weird.
So retail has gone through this sort of evolution where there was a period where they were just pumping stores. They wanted every store to be exactly the same. And I remember building CBS stores in the U.S. We built 500 stores a year, and they were exactly the same. Like, you just pump it was a manufacturer's dream. You just start manufacturing. And then it went through this cycle of sort of get as many out there and get as many as you can, make them all exactly the same. So then people started saying, well, these are all exactly the same. We got to start being creative with our space and creating more of a destination, because there's some competition out there and they can't all look the same. Especially in the U.S., it was really bad. Like, whether you went into a CVS or a Walgreens you could have a CVS and a Walgreens across the street from each other. And
Same floor plan.
they would look exactly the same. Like,
yeah.
Why would I go in that one versus that one? And then, then they just start to have price wars, and it's a race to the bottom. You have to think. You got to use your head. You have to create a destination. Why do your customers want to come here? And I think that retail in general went through that evolution. Starbucks, tremendously. Same thing. We had sort of 3 floor plans for a Starbucks, and we just pump them out as much as you can, really. And then they started doing the same thing, just rethinking their space. And why do people want to? They went. Starbucks is great. They went through this evolution where initially they would. I remember having this conversation with senior execs there about they were disgusted by the thought of a drive-through. That they were environmentally unfriendly, people sitting in a line with their cars running, and then the footprint, the space, the waste of space, like they were just disgusted by the whole thing. To now, 20 years later, come full circle where the only thing they're building is drive-throughs, because they don't want people mixing and mingling within their space. It's a COVID effect, really. And they went through a time where they didn't want people lingering in their store. Then they did want people lingering in their store. The environmental people say, well, we want people hanging out here because it's cool. We want it to be a cool place for people to hang out.
The third environment that Schultz talks about, right?
But the dollars and cents people say... Yeah,
you buy a single coffee and then you sit here for 4 hours, which is what I used to do, right? I get there at 6 a.m. when it opens, I'd buy a coffee and I'd work there till 11 or noon until my ass basically hurts.
That's exactly right. So it's interesting to see this evolution, I call it. It's just the change in retail at large. Another one was...
So hold on, so real quick. So if you can remember that point, because of ADHD and stuff that we all have, but... So what happened with Canadian Tire? So the big thing was like Canadian Tire went, because I remember, like, I grew up in Port Perry. The Port Perry Canadian Tire, man, it was like this, you couldn't even grab product off the shelf because everything was so tight. Yeah. And so they were all different, but then they build all of these new ones. Some have gas bars, some don't, and all this stuff. But yeah, you walk in and everything is in a different place.
So I remember the Port Perry store very well. That was another thing. Canadian Tire was my first account. So early in my career in this business, like, I went to and was personally very engaged in every single installation we did at Canadian Tire. So I traveled all over the country.
So perfect example though. Port Perry, right? You got to build a new store. It was an outdated store. Great, you build a new one. Yeah. But then look at, I actually grew up at Don Mills and Finch and then moved to Port Perry. So think about the Shepherd and Leslie store, right? 2 stories, automotives below. Like, it's just, it's bizarre how different these things are.
Yeah. That other fundamental shift in retail was that the old Canadian Tire would have all-out racking. So racking over top of gondola. And didn't just stack inventory as high as you could. And the idea was, or the thought was, that would impress customers and that would make them want to come there because they would know you have it, that you've got it there.
Right.
There would just be an impressive thing to see. So number one, we got rid of the all-out racking just because it was a waste of money, because we weren't using it for pallets, we were putting it for boxes. So people were having to use ladders to take boxes and stack them up on top, and which an incredible waste of time and money it was. So let's just go with shelving, but we'll go with, it'll be tall shelving. So it'll be 9 feet tall. So we'll still have that sort of impact of inventory, but above, so what they did was above 7 feet to 9 feet was all empty boxes. They just did it for visual, it was
empty boxes.
Yeah.
It wasn't because I know you can put boards, the design, and you pull the board up and there's, inventory behind there and stuff, but yeah. Empty boxes.
That's another evolution. But the very first evolution was just empty boxes, and they actually charged the product guys for space. If you wanted to fill up that top shelf with, whatever, Noma lighting, we'll fill it up with Noma lighting.
Empty boxes.
And you're going to pay and you're going to pay for the space. It's going to be very impressive. Coming now to where we are today, where, inventory is not a good thing. It's a very costly thing. We've become more, retailers have become more, aware of the dollars and cents of the cost of a purchase, and inventory is not a good thing. The distribution centers and getting things out in relatively quick time. Not everything has to be at your fingertips like it did.
Mm-hmm. But to now like the Costco effect type thing, which is like, hey, why don't we just take some pallets, drop it on the ground? We have it for now. When we're sold out, and like, right. which is kind of it seems like the next generation of.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's very old school again, right? Because that's the idea of the old markets where, you got what you got, you want it, it's here, take it, and then, but exactly that, when it runs out, it's out. So it makes it sort of artisan, makes it sort of boutique-y.
It makes people go like, I want it or I don't want it. I have to buy it now. If I do want it, it creates scarcity mentality. It does all kinds of things to screw up shoppers in fun ways.
Yeah, fantastic. and then the other one was, I thought this was pretty cool too, was Tim Hortons. So when Tim Hortons went to the digital menu board.
Yeah.
Right? So prior to that, they were static boards. They were those big backlit, with fluorescent lights, mm-hmm. and they had a description that was printed on a piece of vinyl, and then they had little, blockouts where you could change prices. Mm-hmm. But to change a price was a big job in a single store.
Yeah.
When they came to us and said, we want to switch out to digital menu boards, and we need to do it across the country, and we need to do it quickly. We did 2,000 stores in, I think it was 10 months. We got them done, start to finish, and it was a real engineering challenge, manufacturing challenge, because those spaces are all different. Mm-hmm. Some had trusses, some had T-bar ceiling, some had open ceiling, some had bulkheads, some didn't have bulkheads. And so the execution was incredibly difficult, and we handled it incredibly well. And the same thing, that became a game changer, right? That was like, I remember early on going, you guys are spending a lot of money on screens. Is this worth it?
and then everyone sees it, everyone follows. And, they can advertise any food that they want. They can push anything they want. They can change pricing by pushing a button.
Exactly.
Right? Digital content network rather than a bunch of boards.
Right. Yeah. So real game changer stuff. And I take great pride in it, and we learned, extensively from them. And I just like those kinds of things are amazing. Fortinos, the first time we did the new concept Fortinos. And I remember sitting in the office with the guy that was responsible for design, and he was out there.
In what way?
He did just the concepts that he was coming up with were out there. It was not grocery as it was at the time. Grocery as it was at the time was very linear and very boring, and at that time there was no fresh food there, that sort of thing. And he was introducing this concept of prepared foods. And it was kind of like, look, I hope this works because we're spending a lot of money on this. And the big thing was that we were taking up a lot of floor space that would otherwise be very efficiently and effectively used at. So the argument was a difficult one to put over on the traditional grocer, where we're just, we're going to stack this as high as we can because people will come and buy it, to where, this guy, Paulo's coming in and saying, well, you're going to get rid of this, 40 feet of island, and we're going to put there making sushi for people. It was a very difficult argument to have early days. And now, that's the way it is everywhere. Every grocer has fresh food being prepared, tons of it.
Yeah. It's not just a deli counter anymore. It's gone.
Right.
Fresh food, different styles, pizza ovens and metros and all of these things, right?
Yeah. Like pizza ovens. That's a great one. Pizza ovens. When Longo's first put a coffee roaster in the first store, and that was, do you know how much a coffee roaster costs, and how much roasted coffee can be produced by a single machine? And it was like, well, whatever, we'll figure it out. And then you find out that there's not a lot of coffee roasters around, and everybody needs the service. Like the coffee guys need the service. So it's a game changer event that, seemed like a silly idea or not necessary, when it was a concept, but then it becomes really smart. I love that.
So in your mind, because again, everything has to be driven by a business driver or business purpose first. Yeah. In your mind, with these game changers and even with the regular work that you guys do, what is your responsibility in this?
Our responsibility is to bring it to fruition in the most responsible manner. Yeah. To make the dream come true.
Well, and the only reason I ask that is because, you talk to any salesperson, you talk to any vendor, partner, whatever you want to call them. The thing is, I guess what I want to try and figure out is at what point, who should come to you with what, and at what point are you guys just taking control and ownership over making sure this happens properly?
Yeah. It's interesting. And Michael and I were having this conversation, yesterday, that, you might have done it once in one store, and then practically it just doesn't make sense. You just don't do it anymore. You propose alternatives to your clients, and they're so happy for it. Just do that right out of the gate.
Right. I just had this conversation with my team. What's ours? What's not ours? What should we push on? And at the end of the day, I was just run our clients' businesses like it's our business, and make the decisions that you would make if you were in their situation. And if ultimately, if I were your client and I found out I have to roll out all these stores with Marble, and if I happen to find out that this is going to add 6 figures or 7 figures to the entire project, I'm going to be really pissed at you for not telling me that there's a better solution out there. I'm going to be really pissed off. And so I tell my team, I was like, guys, just use this piss off test. If you find out later that it could have been this way and you knew, but you let it go.
Right. Would you be pissed off? If you would, then don't do it.
Right.
And I realize, being the practical person, I realize that there is a time and a space for a designer. There is a time and a space for them to run and just, lasso the clouds and bring it down. But then there's a time to be practical with it. You have to go outside of the box to be creative, but then just make it practical as well. I mean, you can't just.
Well, let me ask you. So Shoppers comes to you and you go can you guys afford to build all these stores? And you said that, Tim Hortons comes to you and you go, this better work. It's a lot of money you guys are investing. And then you talk about Longo's with the coffee roaster and you're like, are you sure? So it sounds like that the things that you're most proud of are the ones that even you yourself were questioning.
Yeah.
So how do you know which ones are the ones to question but go through with, and which ones are the ones to question and push back on?
It's a good question. I question all of them. I question everything. That's why I try to stay out of the early.
Because you would just make it way too practical, way too small.
You got to kind of know when to get involved and when to stay out. Got to let it take its course for a little while, but then.
But how do you know? Is there an actual thing where you're like, is it just that the client wants it bad enough that they check the boxes because they understand the risks? You've done your job. You can sleep well at night. Like how do you know? Like if you question everything, is there any way to know which ones are like this is worth the gamble or not?
Jeez, good question. We had one project when cupcakes were a thing. Right? Not long ago, 5 years ago, 7 years ago,
I remember this.
This needs to be marble. This needs to be, that. Now that I think of it, did the same thing. They did the exact same thing, as a matter of fact. They had the back counter, and they insisted that it be this white and silver vein marble, and it had to be like this specific mix of.
Right, so they picked the softest, easiest to stain material possible. Not practical, not great.
Exactly, and I said that to them, and the people I didn't go up far enough up the ladder at that point in time. My relationship was new, so we were just dealing with the construction people, and I'm telling them, these are all bad ideas. Like we build coffee shops all the time. We know what works and we know what doesn't. Listen, I'm not guessing here. This is a bad idea. We built that first store at King Street, and this is the downside of it is. Now that's our store. Mm-hmm. So anybody that has a problem with it says Canada's Best Door Fixtures did that. Mm-hmm. For self-preservation, you have to really consider what you're doing, because if it's the wrong thing, you're going to get branded with it.
Right, and it's a small industry. Everybody knows everyone.
Right. So the fact that I said, don't use marble back there, really doesn't matter at the point where it's all stained. Someone says, that's Canada's Best Door Fixtures countertop there.
Right.
And they don't have to understand how, why, what. You just get branded with it, right? So, and that's happened a few times. That can be shitty. And sometimes you have to own that little label for a long time after.
And I know that must just piss you off.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So for you, when you think back on all these things, let me ask you this last question. Is there a way, so I asked if you could spot which ones to fight for and not fight for and all this stuff. Is there a way to spot what makes you really excited about a new project? Obviously, it's not doing the same old, but what's the thing? Like if I could say, hey, if you're in this situation, you got to bring it here because we love these types of challenges.
Like there's the easy one, like from that perspective, there's the easy ones where, I say, you want to build a coffee shop. We've built literally thousands of them in all kinds of different materials. So we are, we can help you accelerate your learning curve, right out of the gate. So that's why you should come to us. But from my own desires, it's creativity, blending different retail approaches sparks my interest and makes me want to have our organization involved. And I think that we're in a better position to help because we've had all these experience. That's ultimately, it always comes down to experience and trust, right? Like, make use of the knowledge base that they've acquired over time. And can you trust them to stand behind their product or their service? That they're not going to run from you if something goes south. I think that's the basis of any business. I love customers that are looking for that sort of help. They want to revolutionize, they want to do something a little different, and they just need some help.